You know what's curious? People think being strong means never breaking down, that if you cry, you've lost control. But the truth is, sometimes it's right there, in the middle of the sobs, the lump in your throat, and the silence that follows, that we finally find ourselves. Helena learned that the hard way. For years, she held everything together, swallowed words, and locked up feelings so she wouldn't seem weak. But the body, the heart, and the soul have limits we pretend not to see. One day she couldn't pretend anymore. The tears came without asking permission, and with them came a sharp clarity. People looked, judged, whispered, said she was too sensitive, that she was overreacting. Little did they know, what ran down her face wasn't despair, it was liberation. That was the first time she cried not for someone else, but for herself. And that's what this story is about. About the moment when the heart says enough before the mouth does. About understanding that crying isn't weakness, but the quietest act of courage. Because sometimes what the world calls drama is just the body saying, I don't want to keep putting out fires I didn't start. And if you've ever been called weak for feeling too much, stay until the end. Maybe, deep down, you were just letting go. Helena had always been the kind of person who learned early to swallow her tears. Since she was a kid, she heard phrases that sounded like advice, but were really cages. Stop being dramatic. Be strong. Don't get upset over everything. And she believed them. She grew up thinking showing emotion was leaving herself open to get hurt. So she built a shell, polished, steady, admirable. But inside, her soul was starving for comfort. At work, she solved everything. She fixed what no one else noticed. Among friends, she listened to everyone but herself. And the more she played the strong one, the heavier it got. It was like holding up the roof of a house alone, impressive from the outside, painful from within. Sometimes at night, the pillow was the only place she could be real, and even there, she felt guilty for breaking down. But one day, something shifted. Helena realized she had become an expert at pretending to be fine, but a stranger inside her own life. And once that truth hits, it doesn't go away. That's when she began to ask herself, who am I trying to prove my strength to? And what happens when the body gets tired of pretending to be made of steel? The answer started to come, not in words, but in tears. It was on an ordinary Tuesday when her body finally spoke louder than her mind. No dramatic scene. No fainting spell, just a strange stillness between one task and another, a fatigue that felt years old. Helena was typing an email when suddenly the screen blurred behind her tears. There was no logical reason, and maybe that's what scared her most. It was as if her body said, now it's my turn to say what you've kept quiet. She tried to hide it, went to the bathroom, locked the door, splashed water on her face, stared into the mirror, and barely recognized herself. That exhausted woman with red eyes looked like someone begging for help, not from others, but from herself. And in that reflection, she understood. She'd been draining herself trying to be what everyone expected. The breakdown didn't arrive as weakness. It came as freedom, demanding to be released. Did anyone notice? Of course not. They said she was different, distracted, that she should get some rest. But no one truly asked if she was okay. The world doesn't listen to the exhaustion of those who seem strong. And as she tried to catch her breath, she realized that breakdown wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a reckoning with everything she'd swallowed for years. And in that reckoning, something inside her began to crack, but this time, on purpose. The tears came without warning, heavy, steady, almost defiant. They weren't from despair. They were from exhaustion. Helena cried in a way that echoed inside her chest, as if every drop whispered, "Enough!" And in that moment, she understood something simple yet powerful. Crying wasn't a sign of weakness. It was an ancient cry asking to be heard. It was the body finally saying what the mouth never dared to admit. From the outside, no one got it. Some laughed, others looked away, uncomfortable with the sight of someone exposing their soul. They called it drama, oversensitivity. But Helena knew that cry wasn't for attention, it was for respect. It marked the end of a role she'd never chosen to play. It was how life put her back in her own place. When the tears dried, the silence felt different. It wasn't emptiness anymore, it was space. And in that space, something new began to grow, a calm that came with an unfamiliar sense of strength. Because sometimes that's how it is. We have to break to find where our limits truly live. And right there, between silence and calm, she started to see what she really needed to let go of. After the tears came silence. Not the heavy one, full of resentment, but a clean kind of silence, the kind that's left when the soul can finally breathe. Helena started noticing the sound of wind against the window, the smell of coffee in the morning, the light coming through the curtains, small things that used to go unnoticed because she was always trying to survive everyone else's noise. Now she only wanted peace, and peace, she learned, is a place you learn to live in little by little. In the days that followed, she distanced herself from some people, not out of anger, but out of love for herself. She stopped over-explaining, stopped trying to fix what wasn't hers. She began choosing her conversations carefully, her replies slower. It was as if she'd traded screaming for long breaths. The silence became her shield, and somehow her prayer. With time, she realized that emptiness wasn't loneliness. It was space to begin again. The pause between who she was and who she was becoming. And even without knowing what came next, one truth was certain. She'd never again pretend to be stone just to be accepted. Because when silence feels that peaceful, it means something beautiful is about to bloom. It was strange to see how the world reacted when Helena stopped explaining herself. People who once walked all over her started stepping carefully. Friends who only showed up to vent disappeared when she learned to say, "Not today," and in that distance, she understood. When you start respecting yourself, you unsettle those who fed off your imbalance. The problem was never the crying. It was the day she learned to wipe her tears with dignity. A co-worker even said she seemed different, colder. She smiled, the kind of calm smile only someone who survived a storm knows. It wasn't coldness, it was boundaries. The difference between the two is that one comes from fear, the other from peace. And inside, she felt something she'd never felt before, a quiet respect for herself, like finally seeing her reflection and thinking, "There I am." The most beautiful part, life responded. Situations that used to drain her started falling away on their own, as if her frequency had changed. Maybe it had, because when we change inside, the world rearranges outside. Helena didn't need to shout to be heard anymore. She just needed to exist fully. And in that existence, simple and whole, she discovered what real strength meant. Helena realized being strong was never about enduring everything. Strength isn't bearing the unbearable. It's choosing what deserves to stay. It's having the courage to let go of the rope before it drags you under. For a long time, she thought endurance was virtue, until she understood that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is give up what's slowly destroying you. Crying, after all, had been the strongest thing she'd ever done. Gradually, She forgave herself for all the times she put herself last. She stopped measuring her worth through others' approval. And when someone called her too tough, she laughed softly. Because only those who've fallen apart completely know the worth of rebuilding. Pain had taught her what no book could, that sensitivity is strength disguised as tenderness. In the end, true strength makes no noise. It shows up in the calm of someone who's learned to choose themselves without needing to defend it. Helena saw that in her own reflection, no tears, just peaceful eyes. Because the opposite of weakness was never hardness, it was peace. And in that peace, she finally found what she'd always been searching for. Not power, but lightness. Helena didn't become colder. She became whole. She learned that crying wasn't the end of strength. It was the beginning of truth. Today, when someone calls her too sensitive, as if it's an insult, she smiles. Because she knows that feeling isn't a flaw. It's proof that there's still life beating inside. The world, she thinks, needs more people who feel than people who pretend they're fine. She no longer carries the burden of proving herself to anyone. She understands that those who confuse kindness with submission have never known the price of calm. And those who call healing weakness still haven't learned to look at themselves with gentleness. Helena cried, yes, but through those tears she washed away the leftovers of a love without reciprocity, a draining job, a silence that hurt, and finally she felt light. So, if this story touched you, ask yourself, what inside you is still begging to be let go? What have you been calling weakness that might just be your heart trying to heal? If this story made sense to you, subscribe and turn on notifications. Here we learn together about the power of stories that heal and the quiet beauty that comes after.